You know that kind of person who seems to have woken up one day and decided that their mission on Earth is to control everything you do? South, I moved to this neighborhood, thinking I'd made a great deal. A brand new house, a quiet neighborhood, streets named after flowers, and a neighborhood that, at first glance, seemed straight out of a margarine commercial. But there, behind every perfectly pruned bush and the colorful houses with little U.S. flags, was something much more sinister: the invisible and abused power of the HOA. And at the helm was a woman with more free time than sense. At first, I thought she was just a little too dedicated to the cause. Whenever I put the garbage in the garbage can on the wrong day, there she was, taking pictures. If my grass grew half an inch longer than allowed, she was already on the sidewalk measuring it with a ruler and writing it down in a little notebook that looked like an FBI diary. But things started to get more bizarre than that. I've always looked after my house my way. Old roof? Yes, but it was well looked after, firm, with no leaks. But one day, I received a strange notification from the HOA saying that my roof was visibly deteriorated and that, therefore, an intervention was necessary as a matter of urgency. I laughed, nervously. I thought it was just another one of those attempts to get a quote from some contractor who's the HOA's wife's cousin. I ignored it. Dumb me. 2 days later, at 8 in the morning, an old pickup truck pulls up in front of my house. A guy with an orange vest, a yellow helmet, and a clipboard gets out, like those characters who show up to take down lampposts that nobody asked for. And the guy walks into my yard like he owns it. He didn't even knock. He didn't even ring the bell. He already put a ladder on the wall and started pulling up tiles. I ran out with the crumpled face of someone who's barely had coffee. The guy said he was there at the behest of the Residents Association to start the complete replacement of the roof of the house as it was in an advanced state of structural degradation. That's good. The icing on the cake? He showed a piece of paper with the HOA stamp on it and a badge printed on sulfite paper with his name written on it in Bic pen. It was such a ridiculous scene that I wanted to laugh, if it weren't for the fact that the man had already ripped off 2 roof tiles when I went to shout at him. And the woman? She was watching the whole thing from the sidewalk, cup of tea in hand, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that looked like it came out of a lavender harvest catalog. Her face was pure satisfaction. That expression of someone who thinks they're saving the neighborhood from an apocalypse caused by a beige roof. I demanded that the man stop immediately. He said he was just following orders. I demanded to see the order in writing. He showed me the paper again, a piece of paper that, let's face it, looked more like a shopping list than an official authorization. And then, in the midst of my indignation and the sound of cracking tiles, I remembered. That same week, the state safety inspection of the neighborhood's homes was scheduled to take place. A process that happens once every 5 years. Just the kind of thing that, if it goes wrong, can get your house shut down. Coincidence? For me, it was a dirty trick. And then it hit me. That woman didn't want to save the neighborhood. She wanted my house to be condemned. What if the roof had been partially dismantled on the day of the inspection? Point for her. I, the negligent resident, would be fined, punished, maybe even evicted. The woman didn't want a nice neighborhood. She wanted a neighborhood where only those she liked would live. And guess what? I wasn't one of the cookies and tea and corn cobs crowd. She tried to bring me down with a smile on her face and a hired hand on the sly. And the worst was yet to come. The first thing that went through my head was, I'm going to be banned because of some crazy woman who woke up and chose to make me enemy number 1 on the court. Because it wasn't just a question of aesthetics. Even a partially altered roof was reason enough to fail a state inspection. And who touches a roof without a court order or the owner's permission? That's right, people with bad intentions or completely crazy. Sometimes both. The guy on the ladder, still confused, stopped moving when I started recording with my cell phone. It's funny how a smartphone in the hand reminds an employee that he might be doing something wrong. He even tried to justify it, saying that he was only fulfilling the contracted service, and that lady, pointing discreetly with her chin, had said she had the owner's permission. A lie more poorly told than that. Only the stories that the HOA staff spreads about a neighbor who paints his house beige and becomes the reason for an emergency meeting. The woman, of course, feigned surprise. She put on that silly face she seems to have learned from watching Mexican soap operas in the 90s. She crossed her arms, said that, if there had been any mistake, she would sort it out personally with the association, and that she never intended to cause any trouble. At this point, the man on the ladder had already climbed down, wadded up the fake paper he was carrying, and was pretending to fiddle with the trunk of the truck, like he wanted to disappear. I went inside, still in shock. I called the state inspector, who was scheduled to visit me 2 days later. I explained the situation. I used the words illegal attempt at partial demolition, document fraud, and violation of private property. He was silent for a second and said he would write it down for the final report. I could almost smell the paperwork in the air. Because when the state gets involved, you know, bureaucracy and delay are the only guarantees. That night, I went to sleep to the sound of reinforced duct tape running over my roof. That's because I called a bricklayer friend to at least cover the 2 tiles that the demolition official had ripped off. The fear of rain and water falling into the house was greater than my patience with this woman. And believe me, my patience was already buried in some corner of the garden where she kept complaining that there was too much weed. The next day, the little notes began. One on my gate saying that my attitude was extremely aggressive and unbalanced. Another, folded and placed between the mailbox and the neighborhood newspaper, saying that individual attitudes that put community safety at risk need to be firmly punished. And, of course, an email from the HOA signed by she, always she, summoning all members to an emergency meeting about the dangers of non-compliance with structural standards. They were trying to paint the narrative that I was in the wrong. Me, who just wanted my house in peace, with my roof intact, without anyone climbing over the wall at 8 a.m. with a hammer in their hand. It was like living in a bad episode of a bad series. You know it's too absurd to be real, but you still keep watching because you need to know how far the characters will go. And then, the day of the inspection arrived. I didn't even sleep the night before. I kept reviewing the recordings, organizing the paperwork, gathering emails from the HOA to show that they had zero authorization to mess with the structure of my house. I woke up early, made myself some coffee, and stood on the balcony looking like I was ready for war. I didn't want any trouble, but if it came, I was going to welcome it with open arms. The inspector arrived with a clipboard, a sweaty shirt, and the look of someone who has seen worse, but not many. We'll start with the garden. Everything's fine. External cladding? Okay. Electrics, exposed pipes, pressure valve, everything as expected. And then he looks up. He turns his head slightly and points. Why is there a sign of newly laid roof tiles just on this stretch? That's when the scene I'll never forget began. She appeared on the other side of the street, as if she wanted nothing. Sunglasses, gym clothes, a glass of green juice in her hand, and that calculated gait of someone who knows she's about to get into trouble. And she did. The woman crossed the street, pretended to be surprised to see the inspector, and began a rehearsed speech that sounded more like a fifth-rate play. We are very happy with this inspection, sir. Our community has always prioritized safety and aesthetics. In fact, it was in this spirit that we identified the roof of this property as a potential risk, and we took swift action to ensure our collective well-being. She said this, looking me in the eye. That wasn't courage. It was desperation disguised as leadership. The inspector, who must have seen 30 Karens on his CV, simply asked, "Do you have any official authorization or written record that this type of intervention has been approved?" Silence. She blinked a few times, smiled yellow, and said that she thought it best to act proactively. I almost laughed. I really did. The inspector wrote something down, mumbled a dismissive, "I see," and continued his rounds. She tried to stay close, like a shadow, but the guy asked to speak to me alone. And when he said, "This will generate a state rape report with legal implications," I knew the bomb had officially been planted, and she was sitting on it, smiling. The woman had messed with the wrong person, and the inspection had only just begun. After that, "This will generate a state rape report with legal implications," I was silent for a few seconds, trying to absorb what it really meant. My home, my tranquility, my routine of late afternoons in the backyard with a glass of wine, and the feeling that, at least there, the world made some sense, all threatened by an outbreak disguised as community politics. It was unbelievable. And the most revolting thing, authorized by none other than her. That woman who called herself the official defender of the visual integrity of the street, as if my roof was the harbinger of the apocalypse in the condominium. After the inspection, which ended with a bunch of notes and the inspector saying that he would contact the appropriate bodies, I clenched inside. It wasn't going to die there. I knew she wasn't going to accept being beaten up like that in public, especially with the inspector clearly realizing that she was more trouble than she was worth. And I was right. Over the next few days, the real soap opera began. First, the woman organized a march of concerned neighbors, where 3 pensioners were dragged begrudgingly down the street with placards saying things like "Safety first" and "Standardization is love." It sounded like a comedy show. The oldest of them, Donna Ruth, stopped me at the gate and whispered that she was only there because the woman had promised an orange cake at the end. The level of manipulation had already gone beyond the ridiculous and was flirting with desperation. The following week, I received a formal letter from the HOA saying that my aggressive behavior in the face of an attempt at preventive maintenance would be discussed at a special meeting. The icing on the cake? The text said that I had physically threatened a third-party employee serving the community. I laughed, but that nervous, dry laugh of someone who has hatred built up to the back of their head and knows they're dealing with someone who lives in an alternative reality, where common sense has been deported with no chance of appeal. I could ignore it. I could just sit back and watch the circus burn. But you know what? I got tired of being a spectator. I wanted to light the match. I took all the videos, prints of the emails, notes, the photo of the badge made in paint, and went to a lawyer, one of those who loves a fight with a neighborhood association. When he saw the material, he said, "This could lead to civil and criminal proceedings." That gave me a peace that not even liquid passion fruit can offer. While he was preparing everything, I noticed that the woman was strangely calm. That calm that precedes a storm. She started saying good morning, waving from afar, pretending that nothing had happened. That's when I understood. She knew she had stepped on the wrong foot, and now she was trying to smooth over the history, as if pretending to be sympathetic was going to erase the attempt to sabotage my state inspection with a bricklayer for hire and a piece of paper printed in Comic Sans font. Only her plan went down the drain faster than soap in the rain. About 4 days after the inspector's visit, 2 state technicians returned, this time with a re-evaluation form and direct questions about the unauthorized intervention. One of them asked if I had proof that it was done without my consent. When I showed him the video of the guy on the roof saying the lady ordered it, he looked at his colleague and said, "This is going to stink." And it did. The HOA went into panic mode. The woman tried to call a reconciliation meeting, where I would supposedly have the opportunity to apologize for the stress caused to the community. I didn't apologize at all. Instead, I sent an out-of-court notice, signed, stamped, filed, with a list of demands so clear that even a literate cat could understand. A formal retraction, suspension of the sanctions against me, and the woman's immediate removal from her position as the association's home infrastructure coordinator. She ignored it, of course, or tried to pretend she didn't, until the moment she received the summons. It was beautiful, Oscar-worthy. The officer arrived at her door with the envelope in his hand, and I watched from the window like someone watching fireworks on New Year's Eve. She tried to argue, to ask what it was about, but the officer just handed it over and said, "Sign here, please." And that was that. She signed. She confirmed receipt. She sealed her fate. In the street, the mood changed. Neighbors who had previously just shaken their heads in pity began to approach me. People who had never spoken to me now came to pat me on the back and say, "This woman has crossed the line. It's about time someone reacted." There was even one who offered me apple pie. I swear, it became a kind of collective revolt. But the best was yet to come. Because when you mess with the state, with a lawyer, and with filmed evidence, the consequences aren't just aesthetic. They're real, legal, and delicious to watch. What nobody tells you when you buy a house in a neighborhood with an HOA is that, along with the deed, comes a free package of headaches, aggressive letters, and a folkloric figure who thinks he's the modern reincarnation of the neighborhood sheriff. But sometimes the role of sheriff gets to your head so much that you forget one basic thing. There is a limit, and when that limit is crossed, there's no chamomile tea or Sunday cupcake meeting that can solve it. That's exactly what happened to her. After the summons was delivered, the theater was over. The mask of community protector fell away, revealing what had always been behind it. A woman obsessed with control, who confused authority with authoritarianism and thought she could invade other people's homes as naturally as she plants hydrangeas in the sidewalk. Only now, it was no longer just a nuisance. It was a lawsuit, a real lawsuit, with a protocol, a lawyer, a deadline, and the risk of heavy compensation. The next few days were a spectacle. I don't know if it was the fear of being exposed or if someone finally talked some sense into her, but the woman disappeared from the street. No morning walk, no walking around with that damn clipboard, no stopping to inspect the neighbor's garbage. She evaporated. And the neighborhood? The neighborhood breathed. The silence was almost therapeutic. The sound of birds was once again the loudest of the morning, and no one had to pretend to be busy to avoid a 15-minute conversation about how the paint on your door is 2 shades below the approved palette. The HOA meeting took place, even though the lawsuit was ongoing, because of course these entities love a stage. And it was there, in the community hall that looks more like an air-conditioned punishment room, that she tried to defend herself. She got up on a makeshift stool, yes, literally, a stool, and began a dramatic reading of a text in which she basically said that she was being the victim of personal persecution, and that everything she did was in the name of collective well-being. There was even a moment when she almost cried. Almost. But nobody fell down. People were tired. I saw the looks on the neighbors' faces, the looks of people who had had enough. When she finished her speech, one of the council members, that nice man who always carried a black folder under his arm, stood up and said, "With all due respect, so-and-so, but this isn't about the roof anymore. It's about abuse of power." The room applauded. Applauded. I didn't even have to open my mouth. That was more cathartic than any revenge I could have imagined. After that, the board voted, and unanimously, she was stripped of any position within the association. She lost the right to actively participate in decisions, and, most importantly, she was forbidden to make any direct contact with the residents regarding rules or inspections. Basically, they turned the tyrant into an ordinary citizen, a downgrade worthy of a soap opera. The lawsuit, in turn, continued unabated. My lawyer was one of those who takes a deep breath before destroying someone on legal grounds. We filed for damages for trespassing, moral damages, attempted document fraud, and breach of home security. The icing on the cake was when we managed to attach the deposition of the demolition officer himself, who, after receiving a legal squeeze, confessed that he only did the job because the lady in the neighborhood said it was urgent, and that the owner knew. He handed over everything, from the payment in cash to the printed paper she provided, full of technical terms copied from Google and spelling mistakes. In the end, the judge had no doubts. The sentence came down faster than I expected. She was ordered to pay considerable compensation, covering not only the damage to the structure of the house, but also the psychological distress caused by the absurd situation she had created. In addition, the ruling required her to stay at least 30 meters away from my property. She had to sign a court document guaranteeing that she would never again try to get involved in any aspect of the maintenance of my property. Basically, they turned the former queen of the street into a distant shadow. In the months that followed, she tried to keep a low profile. She drove by with the windows down, pretended not to see anyone, and was gradually forgotten. They say she put her house up for sale, but as her name became synonymous with confusion, no one wanted to buy it. So she stayed, stranded like an old piece of furniture that no one wants to carry up the stairs. The neighborhood, on the other hand, flourished. Without the constant oppression, people began to really interact. Parties came back, barbecues broke out in the backyards, and even the children, who once seemed to hide for fear of being warned for running off the sidewalk, started playing freely again. Well, I rebuilt my roof, of course, but more than that, I regained my peace. The feeling of being able to go out on the balcony without fear of being photographed, of hearing the sound of the wind without the noise of other people's judgment. That house, which for a while was the scene of a silent war, became my home again. Sometimes people ask me if I would have done anything differently. If I would have ignored it, let it go, avoided the headache. And I answer calmly, no. Because people like that only understand when the answer comes in the form of a lawsuit, a sentence, and silence. The woman tried to destroy my roof to destabilize me. In the end, she was the one who collapsed. And you know what? I didn't think so. And if you think so too, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.